Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Kvetching with Adam and Jared. This is wonderful. We have a guest tonight. I think it's the first episode in a while where we've had a guest. The last two have been solo episodes.
And
And
our guest actually is in the United States from Israel for a short length of time in Miami right now, right?
That's right. It's winter, and I had to leave Jerusalem because it was too cold, so I went to Miami.
couldn't
So
you
we'll
have just
let our
gone
guest,
to couldn't you have just gone to Tel Aviv?
yeah,
Um,
good point.
I don't know, man.
Hmm.
Winter in Israel is not as much fun as Florida,
Hmm.
just for a
Okay.
few days.
Well, we'll let our guest introduce himself.
Yeah, we do things casual here. We don't bother with the introduction. So tell us all about yourself. First of all, nobody
Hi,
knows your name yet. We didn't even mention your name. We never got to that.
okay.
All people
I'm
say
Dave.
you're from Israel and you're in Miami. That's it.
I'm for yeah, and I don't, and it's only for a couple of days anyway. I'm David Hazony. Um, I'm the editor of this new book, Jewish Priorities: 65 Proposals for the Future of Our People. It's really kind of ambitious, sweeping collection of writers from sort of the entirety of the Jewish world to the extent that's possible. Came out this past October with Wicked Sun Books. Um, I live in Jerusalem. I have a PhD in Jewish philosophy. I grew up as you can probably tell, in the United States on the East Coast. Um, uh, was spent some time in the think tank world, spent some time in different parts, living different lives within the Jewish world. I've edited magazines, edited books, translated, and recently was asked to um, head up a new think tank called the Z3 Institute for Jewish Priorities, which is just an announcement coming out this week. It's connected to the Z3 project, which is based in Palo Alto, California at the Oshman Family JCC. They're best known for the Z3 conference every year.
What is
And
Z3? What does it stand for?
Z3 is the Z3 project is a project that emerged from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, which is Z3 stands for sort of third generation Zionism, where the first generation was led to building the state and then establishing the state. And now we're reaching a new period, a new phase of Zionism where we have to figure out what exactly it means moving forward. That was the original inspiration for the Z3 project and the Z3 conference. What's interesting about them, few things, is that they created a series of conferences that are very, very similar in their sort of deep ethos as Jewish Priorities. Jewish Priorities is, of course, a book, but it's also a whole bunch of events that began with the launch in October with a full-day festival in Philadelphia, and we did a big event in New York at the Stryker Center and at the Z3 conference in Palo Alto. And since then, we've done events in Jerusalem and this week Miami, and we're doing something in Brooklyn and New York and London and LA. I mean, just all over the place. But the core spirit is the idea that we're a single people and that we should sit around the same table even if we radically disagree with each other, because that's what peoplehood is fundamentally about. And the idea of the book was not to get to everybody together to agree on stuff, but the opposite, to create a truly authentically Jewish conversation, pan-Jewish conversation, in which we all get together, like imagine kind of a Thanksgiving dinner where like everybody in the family is there, including that cousin that you despise.
Mhm.
But
If you've
that
ever seen
cousin's there.
Avalon, if you've ever seen Avalon, you don't cut the turkey until all the relatives have arrived.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So my goal here was to cut the turkey at the right time.
good, good, good.
Um, and to do that, we brought together, you know, Jews from all over the place, really, younger and older, and many different industries. There's like a stand-up comic and an NBA star and
Who's the stand-up
philosophers
comic?
and
I have the table.
Claudia Oshry,
Oh, I don't know her. Okay.
also known as Girl with No Job,
Oh, okay.
um, and a Chabad rabbi from campus, and award-winning novelists and people who you've heard of and people you haven't heard of, and just to sort of create some kind of a representation of our people as a whole, and to ask each one of them to imagine that they're giving a TED talk to the whole Jewish people, and they can say kind of one thing, one priority. So that was the original idea, and we were able to put together just this incredible list of contributors. Some of them are more kind of expectable, like Yossi Klein Levy and Dara Horn and Ruth Weiss and Jody Rudoran, the editor of the Forward, and Shaul Magid, and all the way to like Ishai Fleischer, the spokesman for the Hebron Jewish community, but also like Omri Caspi, the NBA star, and just like, what an amazing list, and what an amazing group of people to put together into a single book, where every single one of them has to put forth a thesis of something of importance for our collective future. So that came together and was published in October, just 2 weeks after the October 7th war began. It's kind of there are a lot of funny stories around this book. One of them is that obviously the book came out right after October 7th, and obviously all the essays were written before. Excuse me. But they were written actually significantly before. The deadline of submission was December of 22, which means that they were all written before the judicial reform controversy exploded. Mm-hmm. And so for like 9 months, we were worried that the book would feel out of date because it has nothing in it about judicial reform. And then October 7th happened, mm-hmm. which completely wiped out the whole judicial reform issue and made everything in the book feel more timely all of a sudden, because half the essays are kind of these evergreen, beautiful pieces, about all sorts of different, just general issues, beauty as a Jewish value, or the importance of the search for God, or why Tel Aviv is the most Jewish city on earth.
But don't you think these are greater questions than the judicial reforms issue? I mean,
yeah. And I want to just point something out here in the way you presented what you said. You made a slip from talking about Jewish stuff to centering Israel, right? At first, it was as if we're talking about these weighty Jewish matters that would encompass the entire, Jewish world, and then suddenly it's about the internal workings and events that are happening in Israel. So I'm a little confused on. Look, obviously, Israel is a big topic, right?
No. The question is, well, first of all, our fear was that the book would come out and feel out of date because it doesn't talk about the single issue that was capturing not only the Israeli conversation, but also very much so the global Jewish conversation, which had to do with the controversy inside of Israel. It's hard for us to remember what things were like before October 7th, but there was the coverage of it within the global Jewish conversation was very, very, very intense. A sense of Israel kind of falling apart. And I know because I actually wrote a whole essay on it for the Los Angeles Jewish Journal, and there was just a lot of talk about it at the time. What I'm trying to say is that the moment that disappeared from the agenda, the essays in the book became much, much, much more acutely important. And half of the essays, or a very large chunk of the essays in the book, became obviously and presciently and immediately important, such as David L. Bernstein, who wrote the book Woke Anti-Semitism, wrote a piece called Confronting the New Cossacks about anti-Semitism on the left, and sort of understanding why it is that much of liberal Jewry has had a blind spot for left-wing anti-Semitism for so long. Or Einat Wilf's piece, Zionism as Therapy, which talks about her experience teaching a class on early Zionist thought at Georgetown University, and having one of the students come up to her and say, this is worth like dozens of hours of therapy, and for her to try to explore what that meant and what that actually says about the nature of Zionism itself. Or Isabella Tabarovsky's essay about the Soviet origins of modern anti-Semitism and how so much of the sloganeering that we see on campuses today after October 7th in support of Hamas can be traced directly to the vast anti-Zionist campaigns run by the Soviet Union in the early 1970s.
We had her on our show.
Hey, Adam, aren't you beginning to feel offended we weren't included in this book of Jewish thinkers?
Yeah, I know. I mean, well, we should have been. Yeah.
Listen, honestly, there are about twice as many people who are pissed off at me for not including them in this book as are in this book. So, like, I'm used to it by now.
Well, we had you on the show anyway.
Those are the ones that I know of. Like, I'm sure there are a lot who like didn't even tell me they're pissed off, or people I don't even know who are pissed off.
Well, I mean, I'm a historian, so I tend to explain, why things happened in the past. So, in terms of Jewish priorities for the future, that's not something I would normally weigh in on. I mean, I have my opinions, but it's not my job. I'm not a deep thinker on the future of the Jewish people. Right? It's not one of the.
So the funny thing is nobody is, and at least not by profession. And so that's kind of what makes this book work, is that
Well, then I really
these
should.
ideas are coming, like everybody by definition is an amateur in this field. And what's interesting is to try to ask people to sort of to do that anyway, to reposition and to say, no, this time I want you to be forward facing and not as a prediction, but as a kind of a thesis about what we should care about, what we should be thinking about. And the answers I got were just so diverse and fascinating. And part of my job as an editor was to make sure we didn't have like 6 essays on why everybody should learn Hebrew or something like that. That we should have just one on that subject, and then and to try to help make sure that the subject matter was diverse and interesting and fascinating and well written and so forth. But really, I think what makes it work is just the combination, the putting everybody together. It just sort of clicks in place because it really does feel like this is us. 2024.
Let me ask you about that, the whole Big Tent thing here.
Yeah.
So there's 2 questions. One is, are there boundaries? Is there a limit to who can be included in the tent and who should be excluded? And second, I mean, I certainly don't recognize every single name in here, but I mean, this book does seem to veer towards the right, at least in terms of Israeli politics. I can't speak to other issues about religion just based on the table of contents, but I know where a lot of people stand on Zionism. And there's very few people who I would classify as being on the left.
On the left of
Shaul Magid is one of the few.
Wait, on the left of Israeli politics?
No, to the left on Zionist politics, living in the diaspora, right?
Okay, but so first of all, our people does not live entirely in the diaspora.
Absolutely.
Right? The Jewish people includes a very large number of Jews who live in Israel. And so our scales of what constitutes left and right and so forth need to reflect the reality of our people, including Israelis. So when you say to me, oh, the left isn't represented, and I look and I see, Dalia Scheindlin and Lee Lapid and Fania Oz Zaltzberger, the daughter of Amos Oz, and then the Americans, right? Like, Jody Rudoran, and you mentioned Shaul Magid, and so on and so forth. Yes, it is true that you're not going to find every single gradation of every single person on the left, just like you're not going to find every single Hasidic school represented. It turns out that 65 essays sounds like a lot, but actually it's a very, very small number when you start to get into who the Jewish people are.
Jared's point is that the anti-Zionist position is not really represented.
If we're talking about diaspora,
neither is the anti-reform position nor the anti-anything position. I don't really have anti-positions represented because that's not a position. If you want, tell me what you're for.
Well, okay, the major issue,
So diasporism, for example, which I think is a valid core basis of a Jewish identity, because you believe that there's something crucially important about diaspora life that
Right, but the major
that,
issue that's consuming Jews, academic and philosophical and theological Jews in the diaspora who are centered around college campuses is, at the end of the day, about
it's an
Israel.
awful lot of qualifiers you just put on that. Like the major issue consuming, and then you just like added 800 qualifiers to
Well, I
narrow
can
it
narrow
down
it
to this
down to two.
tiny
Academic,
fraction of
Jewish
the Jewish
academic.
people.
Okay,
My
Jewish.
goal wasn't to be representative of Jewish academia. My goal was to be representative of the Jewish people. To the extent to which Jewish academia has succeeded or failed in representing the Jewish people as a whole, that's something I'm not really responsible for. What I can do is to try, and maybe I succeed, maybe I failed to include some of those positions as well. I don't know exactly, like, do you define academia as people who are purely those who are professional in academia? Because Ruth Weiss's academia also, isn't
No,
she?
I'm talking about the Jewish educated intellectual class. I mean,
A lot of these people are not academics. They're journalists or thought leaders.
Yeah, that's right. Because a lot of Jews are not academics.
but you know, I'm talking about people of the Peter Beinart class, right? The people who
But
propagate.
how big is that?
Hmm?
How big is that?
It's a growing number.
There is a growing number, and they're very.
Are
vocal.
there,
I'm not. I'm
I
not
mean,
suggesting that you should have included them. I wouldn't.
look, I tried very hard not to include people who either define themselves or are there in order to fill the position of an anti-anything. Okay, I didn't want to, there's a fundamental assumption in this book, which is that there is a Jewish people. Okay, and that we are a single people sitting around a table. We also have, there is the Jewish state, whether you like it or don't like it, it still exists. And I didn't include people whose core message is there is no Jewish people. You know, there are people out there who believe that Reform Jews aren't Jewish and shouldn't be included in the number, and because they're a certain kind of ultra-Orthodox, they didn't include them either. All right. Anybody who doesn't accept the core assumptions of the book, there's no reason for them to be in the book. But I do think that what you end up discovering is that there's a certain critical mass. I don't call it right wing. I mean, there are people who insist that Zionism is inherently a right wing thing. Virtually none of them live in Israel. Right? There's like, I live in a country where there's a very far left version of Zionism. And it's probably a lot more communist than some of the far left versions of
Although there's
anti-Zionism
a
in
lot of
America.
left wingers on this in this book, but they're all Zionists. Like Hen Mazig, I wouldn't describe as a right winger.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't know that they're all Zionists, but they are not anti-Zionist because they're also not anti-reform. I just don't like I didn't bring them in order to be anti-anything.
You're interested
Okay,
in
we're
what
talking
they're
about the
affirming,
construction.
you're interested in what they're affirming.
Yeah, I'm interested in 65 affirmations of theses pushing us as collectively forward. So if you don't want to be helping us collectively chart a future together, then there's no reason for them to contribute to this volume.
Do you think
Is
there
that
might be
fair enough?
a difference in how an anti-Zionist would understand Jewish priorities versus a Zionist?
I think that if you take any fringe in any direction, there are going to be differences between how they perceive Jewish priorities. I think that you could find a desert island where there are exactly two people living on it, and they would disagree on Jewish priorities. But that's not the goal of the book. The goal of the book is not to find the most fringe or the most craziest. The goal of the book is to create a kind of representative, crazy version of our people in a book. I mean, we have so many crazy, wonderful, amazing, disagreeing, creative movements and sub-movements and contradictory movements within our people that each one, you know, posing something for a collective future that's totally contradictory to something else. And yet what they all have in common is a belief in the mission, is a belief in the idea of the people as a whole, is a belief in the importance of such articulations, even a recognition of the centrality. I mean, one thing that does emerge is a kind of recognition of the centrality of Israel, even if it's only descriptive, even if it's not prescriptive, that you cannot, you can, like Shaul Magid, for example, who writes about the virtues of exile and about the importance of not using Israel as a crutch in defining Jewish identity. And I found myself very much agreeing, with what he was writing, because I think that Israel is central, much more de facto than de jure. I think it's just but it is central. It is central because it is the place where the greatest degrees of Jewish creativity are taking place and Jewish life in its fullness is taking place. That's me as a Zionist speaking, but much more so me as a Jewish Israeli speaking. It's not coming out of ideology that I say this. It's coming out of the fact that, the music and the art and the videos of kids singing songs about, Purim are just of a completely different order and different degree of richness and different magnitude than so much else that's going on in the Jewish world. And it's worth paying attention to that. But I certainly think it's legitimate to take Magid's position and say, there's a world of, we're losing something by being overly reliant on Israel or overly focused on Israel as a cultural core. And I think that's probably true.
I watched
so
a bit
that's the
of
kind of
his-
thing I want to have.
I watched one of it because he wrote it. Didn't he just publish an entire book about the necessity of exile? I think he's
I
continuing.
think so,
this.
yeah.
And I watched, I skimmed through it, an hour presentation of his just the other day on the subject. And, I found him being very selective in terms of what he was presenting, both in terms of the history of Zionism. He tended to highlight, accentuate the people who would prove his points about, Zionism not being this thing that consumed Jews and drove Jews at the moment of its inception and what came afterwards. He wanted to highlight the Europeanness of it with the implications that this might be a settler colonialist project of sorts, though he didn't say that outright. And then he was, the thing is with exile, theologically speaking, no Jewish state till the Messiah comes was the foundation of Jewish theology for close to 2,000 years, and hence the hostility from most ultra-Orthodox Jews when Zionism emerged. But
At least they said it was the foundation of Jewish
well,
theology.
but I'm saying if you were a Jew living in the
I'm
Middle
not
Ages,
sure that Rabbi Yehuda Levi thought that. I'm not sure that all the different movements
Uh,
of rabbis trying to bring Jews to the land of Israel
I don't
over hundreds of
know, but there's a
years.
difference between settling in Israel and building a state, right? The actual idea of state power and exercising violence to achieve it. I mean, that's not what Yehuda Halevi was after. I mean, he wanted to see the Holy Land and be in the Holy Land with his body while he was still alive. I mean, there are a lot of, there's nothing wrong with that. And Jews kept going throughout the exilic era to Palestine. But the idea, no Jewish state till the Messiah comes, I mean, that was anchored in there after the failed Bar Kokhba revolt, and it took root. The Talmud, it's in the Talmud, it makes it clear, we're not going to return and reestablish the states until the Messiah comes.
Well,
But it's not the way he present. And again, as you suggest, not everyone believes it. That's certainly true today. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's really that relevant an idea anymore. Certainly after 1948, I assume you read Chaim Potok, The Chosen, at some point, and they basically bury the hatchet because it was a fait accompli, and the ones who are still clinging to that are Natsure Karta and the Satmars. I mean, there are very few Jews at this point. So the whole theology change.
Neither of which are represented in this book, by the way, with the exception of Armin Rosen's beautiful essay called The Satmar Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Well, like David, I agree that there's something to what Shaul Magid is saying. I understand that perhaps Israel has become too central in Jewish diaspora attitude and mindset, but a lot of that, and by the way, so maybe also the Holocaust has as well. But
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah, but a lot of that might have to do with the fact that Jews in the diaspora are just in a position where they have to defend the Jewish state, right?
Yeah.
You know, more than anything. So it kind of
One thing,
becomes
Adam,
a source of pride.
Magid, this, you said diaspora. Magid distinguishes in the video, I don't know if he does in the essay here, between diaspora and exile. Exile
Oh,
is
he very deliberately uses the word exile in the essay
yeah,
as well.
because the diaspora, I'm all for the celebration of diaspora culture. I mean, my book on Odessa is basically that. There are many ways to be Jewish abroad that have nothing to do with Zionism, and that's wonderful. But exile, and certainly the leftist secularist variation that magazines like Jewish Currents, starts to take, ends up taking on an anti-Zionist bent, as Adam was just starting to suggest.
Well, I think that's a shame, and I think that we don't want to focus. We don't need to focus too much exclusively on a single essay. There, as I said, there are dozens and dozens of essays there, and certainly everybody's got their specific niche that they're over focused on, and looking for the least nuances and biases within it. And for some, that's the anti-Zionist or post-Zionist academic circles, and for others, it's going to be the fact that I got a letter from somebody saying, "Why did you include anybody from Toronto? We have such a wonderful community, and there's nobody here from Toronto."
Is there
So
is there a Toronto Jewish position? I mean, I'm from Montreal, and I could define
so I
Montreal
wrote him
Jewish
back and I said, "Listen, I didn't have Toronto, and I don't think I have Miami, and I certainly don't have Germany, and South America's not like
Did you have
65.
Youngstown, Ohio?
No, I don't think so. I could be wrong though. And the point is that you could do a whole additional volume covering every other thing. My goal wasn't to check every box imaginable. My goal was to have interesting ideas, first of all. Okay, and to have the content be really, really important and interesting and fascinating and creative and reflective of so many really great thinking Jews. That was my number one goal. My number two goal was to find a way to also create some kind of a representation. I'm not a big fan of like the checking the boxes thing and to have that take precedence over content itself. And I know that makes me like 1,000 years old in the American discourse, but I prefer it that way. Like I want the book to be interesting. I want the ideas to be interesting, and I wanted to show that we as a people have a huge number of really interesting, important ideas to talk about and to think about and to argue about. That's who we are, first of all. It's also true that we're Jews of color, and we're Mizrahim, and we're Hasidim, and we're many, many, many different forms of categories. There are also many categories represented that they didn't feel like being, do I have Orthodox Jews? Well, yeah, like there are a bunch, but they're not there as Orthodox. Like they're there for the ideas. That's the core of the entire point, is that we need to focus on our ideas. And in the wake of October 7th, in which not only in which the paucity of Jewish ideas has been laid bare, and the failure to anticipate what erupted. Yes, obviously everybody knows that Israel had a tremendous intelligence failure militarily and strategically. But what few people talk about is the vast, vast intelligence failure in the diaspora. How come all of these defense organizations failed to predict, were taken by surprise? All these progressive alliances and allyships failed to predict the vast eruption of pro-rapist, genocidal, pro-Hamas anti-Semitism. Well, there's a failure on the part of the diaspora too to lay the right groundwork for it. And that failure comes from the fact that for generations and generations, the other side, and frankly, I want to use the word the enemy, because I feel like we're in a war situation now, not only in Israel, but also in the diaspora. And for generations, the enemy has been investing heavily, heavily, heavily into the intellectual war, into the ideas war, into the structures and the infrastructure, but also the content of ideas that are inimical, not only to Jewish survival, but to Western survival, to civilizational survival. And that we've been asleep at the wheel. We, the diaspora, okay, although I consider myself first Israeli, but we, the diaspora, have been asleep at the wheel and not investing in Jewish ideas that are of relevance and importance to Jewish life. And so this book was an attempt to just flood the system with Jewish ideas. And it happened before October 7th. But now after October 7th, everybody knows that we need to rethink everything. Everybody knows that we need to rethink the core strategies of survival for the Jewish people in America and elsewhere. And yet, where are the tools? Where are the people? Where are the thinkers? So that's why we created Jewish Priorities even before October 7th. And that's why we're creating the Z3 Institute for Jewish Priorities to invest in ideas of actual relevance and importance in light of the new world that the Jews find themselves in a post-October 7th world.
I have a question. Well, first of all, I'm still obsessed with the idea of Toronto, and I'm trying to think of anything of Jewish cultural value that's been produced by the city of Toronto. And all I can think about is Michael Weck's Born to Kvetch. I can't come up with anything else. Whereas Montreal, has given us Mordechai Richler and Leonard Cohen.
And Ruth Weiss and Leonard Cohen.
Weiss, yeah, and I can name a half a dozen other academics from Montreal. But who's the
Hillel Neuer is from Montreal also.
Who is?
I forget Hillel Neuer of UN Watch.
Oh, is he? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of people in Jewish studies from Montreal. Who is the target audience of your book?
Jews who care about our collective future. Really, Jews who care about about seeing us together, seeing Jewish peoplehood not as just an abstraction, but as a manifestation at the level of ideas and speakers and individual writers and thought leaders, whatever that means. And the essays are deliberately limited to 1,500 to 3,000 words, sort of magazine article length. And the reason for that is that in my experience as an editor, that's long enough to say something of importance, but short enough to read in one sitting.
Hmm.
And it's the kind of book that you don't have to read it in any given order. You can pick and choose what you want as you would in a magazine. And that it really lays the groundwork of individual single targeted ideas that can then turn into something much bigger. In fact, several of the articles are already in the process of being turned into books. But others can be turned into programs or initiatives. Take Michael Steinhardt's essay called The Pantheon of Jewish Heroes, where he writes about the importance of heroism to the Jewish future, which is something amazing to read, knowing that it was written before October 7th. And he advocates creating a kind of major new institution that would be sort of pick 18 or 36 heroes from across Jewish history and to focus on them and create educational programming and experiential programming and so forth around 18 heroes in order to build the idea of heroism among Jews. Just fascinating, interesting ideas covering every area from strategic to religious to philanthropy and education and all the areas upon which our collective future depends. And that was my goal here.
Do you see community leaders reading it and then acting upon some of the ideas that were gestated in the book?
I think so. I think so. Based on the responses that we've had from community leaders, they just invited me to speak at this major AGC top dog gathering here in Miami, and many organizations have been ordering it in bulk and distributing it to donors and to educators. I do think so. I think that there is a hunger for content, and it's something that we hear a lot of, and I never really understood what it was. There's a hunger for new content, for new ideas and new expressions and new writers and new people, that especially after October 7th, a sense that we need to start over and start fresh and hear some new voices that haven't been heard before. So yeah, I think so.
This isn't the first book of its kind, though, right? There were precursors, and
there's the Talmud.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But ever since the Enlightenment, people, have been trying to chart the course, of the Jewish future, from Moses Mendelssohn.
Right, but it's always very specific and very carved out, and look, I mean, I'm a scholar of Jewish, to the extent I'm a scholar at all, it's of Jewish philosophy, of modern Jewish philosophy. And so, yes, there have been many, many efforts of individual thinkers to try to penetrate the problematic realities that Jews face at a deep level. And this book doesn't pretend to be that. It pretends its hope is to kind of jumpstart the very possibility of a Jewish conversation. When I was joking about the Talmud, what I meant was, no, I don't know of any precedent in the modern era of a book that attempts to do this, to really embrace the entirety of, or something close to the entirety of the Jewish conversation into a single book. When I was trying to explain it to people before the book came out, I was in LA talking to some very politically involved friends out there. And they were like, can you imagine an American version of this? Like, can you imagine an anthology that has like Trumpists and like anti and Democrats and progressives all in a single book, and different like ethnic groups and religious groups all represented, kind of capturing America in a snapshot. And it was very difficult for them to imagine such a thing. And I think that it would have been very difficult to imagine something like this for the Jews as a whole. And yet somehow we managed to pull it off.
What about the book that was edited a few years ago by Claire Suffren and Yehuda Kurtzer, The New Jewish Canon? Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, but if I'm not mistaken, that book was not new. It was an attempt to canonize existing writings, no?
Yeah, but the point is it brought it all together, right? So, I mean, as you suggested before, people, have been very laser focused.
My point is that these are all new writings. Every essay in this
Absolutely.
book
I
is
know.
original to this book. I think that the idea of creating a new Jewish canon is admirable. I don't know I have no idea how widely it was adopted.
I don't know.
And the point here was to have the conversation, have the new ideas, to inject, to be a living document, and that exists in writing, but also exists in a whole series of events and more writings, and to inspire people to say, look, there really is a Jewish, or can be a pan-Jewish conversation, which I think is something that's achieved here. I think that its purpose is very different from that of the New Jewish Canon.
Are there any essays in particular, you might not want to say since you're the editor, that you were?
They're all my children. No,
yeah. So I'm not gonna ask you if you have any favorite.
No. There's some that I really look. There are many that I really love. I will name a few. If you ask me tomorrow, I will name a different few. Excuse me. Can we edit my coughing? No? Okay.
I tried to.
Look, I like every Israeli, I'm getting over a cold. Like the whole country has been like swarmed with like various viruses and stuff.
Which country? Your country or this country?
Israel.
Ah.
And I am no exception. So I apologize to everybody if I'm coughing. Let's put it this way. When I spoke in Jerusalem, and there's a video of this, I said, I told the audience, I apologize for my post-flu voice, but I'm sure all of you have a post-flu voice. And everybody laughed because it was just obviously true that.
Well, you sound healthy to me. That's healthy.
No, I'm past it. I'm over it. Thank you. I appreciate that. Just there's an occasional lingering heckler in the background, like the Statler and Waldorf of post-nasal drip. Yeah, so I have a bunch of pieces that I really, really like. I mentioned a few of them earlier, David Bernstein and Einat Wilf and Isabel Toborowski, but there are others that really, they were just a lot of fun. So Neri Zilber did write a piece about why Tel Aviv is the true capital of the Jewish people that I love.
What's her thesis? What's her argument?
His thesis. Neri Zilber's
is
no, that it represents, it's representative of the mix and of the vibe and of the creativity that really captures what it means to be a Jew today in a way that no other city does. Um, then you have I'm just looking through David Suissa, editor of the Jewish Journal, wrote a piece in defense of Jewish guilt. He's also from Montreal, by the way.
He is?
Yes, he is. He is.
Really? I had no
Yeah,
idea.
but I think he's from like the Moroccan French side of Montreal.
Based on the
Jewish.
name, yeah, I would say so. But I mean,
Yeah.
I know him, published in the Jewish Journal,
So he talks about the importance of not of like feeling guilty when you don't go to shul. Like, and why and how terrible it is that people try to take away your guilt and say, don't feel guilty. He thinks that's an awful, and it's just a lovely, fascinating kind of contribution. William Kohlbrenner, professor at Bar-Ilan University, a dear friend, wrote a piece called Argue Like a Jew about the deterioration of discourse arising from Jewish discourse arising from our exposure to the broader world and the politicization and partisanship within the broader discourse. And he says that the Jewish form of argument is to argue not in order to win and to crush your enemy, but to learn.
Mm.
And I think and he's a beautiful writer, and I really enjoyed that. Ruby Namdar's piece called An Agadic Jew, about how he, a secular Israeli novelist, was deeply, deeply inspired by his exposure to Jewish Agadah, or a legendary rabbinic legend.
He gave me a copy of his book. I've had it sitting on my shelf since 2000. It's a very large novel. So,
well, he's going to be appearing together with me and Roya Hakekian and Adam Bello on March 3rd. I don't know if that's before or after this is being it's going live.
I have jury duty on the 28th. A lot hinges on that.
Okay, so you may have missed it, dear listener, or you may not have missed it, but March 3rd in New York City on the Upper East Side at Kilath Jeshurun KJ Synagogue at 2 p.m. It's going to be me and Ruby Namdar and Roya Hakekian and Adam Bello talking about why Jewish books are more important now than ever before. Yeah, so like,
are there any articles that any essays in there that explored the issue of intermarriage and how that's going to affect the enlargement?
No, there is one essay by Tuckian about why we need more converts, though.
Okay.
We should aggressively go out.
We need more
converts.
converts?
Yeah, he takes on a pro-convert position.
Ah, well, what's the argument?
But read it. Buy the book. Come
Well,
on.
I downloaded a pirated copy while this conversation was transpiring, but
Excellent. That's a good way to support your author friends. But part of me wants to say, okay, like you've got your intermarriage question. Do you know that in addition to the person who wrote me about Toronto, there's somebody else who wrote me about how come you don't have any cantors there? Like honestly, people have no idea what's involved in creating a book like this. But if I had to like go through every single Jewish profession, like I don't have any moils either.
you have moils have the best stories.
No moil, no shoichet,
Yeah.
no, like come on, man.
You could have
I'm doing
gotten
the
a
best I
moil from
can here.
Seinfeld. That would have been terrific.
Or the one from, do you remember the Saturday Night Live? God, this is really saying how old I am. So there was it was a play on the like Cadillac commercials where like the diamond cutter came out, cut a diamond while riding in the Cadillac.
Yeah, I saw it.
Except the Saturday Night Live version had a moil.
Yeah.
And instead of saying perfect, he said perfect.
It was that the shocks are so good on this car that the moil can perform a circumcision with
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
back when people cared about shocks.
I think a moil could have insight. Whether a cantor has any insights, that's a different. You have rabbis in here, right?
I do. I have several. I have people who have smicha but don't even identify as rabbi because it's just not what they do for a living. I have like, they're professional rabbis and they're, like there's just, I had to get hung up on the categorization and on the box checking because that's part of what this book is, but it really is secondary to the ideas themselves. And I just can't stress that enough because I think that's what makes the book truly important. I could have written 65 bad ideas about the Jewish future. but I wanted it to be to first of all find really, really interesting and different and fascinating and important and controversial potentially. I certainly don't agree with all of them by any stretch, because that would be awful. Um, but but I think that, and this is kind of the point that, and I apologize if I'm kind of being repetitive here, but we are a people of our ideas. We're a people of immense, immense creative thinking power. And when we when we built the state of Israel, we suddenly started applying that immense, immense creative thinking power to problems that we didn't collectively apply ourselves to in the past. And that is part of the incredible innovation and the startup nation, all of that stuff, fine. But it's not by any stretch limited to Israel. It's something that we don't like to talk about because maybe it's not fashionable to talk about Jewish excellence or Jewish this or Jewish that. But let's face it, in an internal conversation, we are the ideas that we have, and we love to develop and think and talk and come up with stuff. And that's what this book is about. It's about the Jewish need to come up with stuff about our future, and that it doesn't limit itself not to liberal Jews of a certain class or not to ultra-Orthodox Jews of another class, not to people who rigorously study the Talmud in its original Aramaic, and not to people who get their dose of Talmud on TikTok. Like it's although Miriam Enzevin, the renowned TikTok Daf Yomi lady, is in the book.
Oh yeah, is she still doing it? I remember seeing it a few years ago.
I was so impressed with it, really, with her videos, that I just had to have her in the book.
She's following the Daf Yomi, right? She was doing.
Yeah, but then it's called Daf Reactions, hashtag Daf Reactions, and then she did a bunch of others that weren't the Daf Yomi, and just an amazing, amazing cultural artifact and educational inspiration, and I really was very, very impressed.
Should we talk about some of the criticism?
Well, look,
Besides the guy from Toronto.
and the guy and the cantor, look, there is legitimate criticism to be had, that no book can be encyclopedic, or perhaps no book should aspire to be encyclopedic. Perhaps the aspiration itself was problematic, but
Well, Professor Zachary Breiterman, and I quote.
That's what I mean. That's
Yeah,
what I
wrote-
mean.
oh, that's what you mean.
As a Jewish studies modern Jewish thought gatekeeper, I hope he's being ironic when he says that, I'm not sure what to do with things like this. On the one hand, a useful index to right-wing and anti-liberal thoughts in contemporary Jewish culture. On the other hand, do we let products like this, funded by deep corporate pockets, flood the zone and dominate the market share? Now, first off, let me just say, if he's being serious, the chutzpah to say something like this, he's acting as if he could be a censor of Jewish cultural production, which is utterly insane. We aren't living
The
in
whole point of your book is that there is no gatekeeper, that we're all collectively coming together to discuss Jewish priorities.
Yeah, yet he claims that this is an index to right-wing anti-liberal thought.
Well, I'm sorry he feels that way, and I'm sure that when you sit very, very, very far on one edge of any spectrum, everything else on that edge on the spectrum is going to look like it's on the other side of you, because it is. I haven't heard that from other people. And I'm sure there are people who are at various extremes of different kinds who I think, wow, I remember my friend once met with this old Satmar Rebbe who happened to be a Nietzsche scholar, and who said, "What do you think about the fact that everybody dismisses your scholarship because you're a Satmar Rebbe?" And the rabbi just said, I put them all in cherem. Like, do you have, so everybody on every extreme of every position is going to look at everybody else and say, wow, they're all a bunch of leftists or rightists or whatever. And I think that the fact that it upsets the person to see that fleshed out so explicitly in the form of a book isn't necessarily a bad thing. My eyebrows were raised when he talks about corporate deep pockets, because I sure wish I'd seen those corporate deep pockets. I don't know which corporation he's referring to that has the deep pockets. This was a project that was very much bootstrapped. But
You mean it wasn't funded by the Koch brothers?
no, in fact, you can take any demonic conspiratorial theory about the sources of financing, and you will find that I wasn't funded by it. Not the Qataris, not George Soros, not
Not
you
Richard,
know,
what's his name, Richard Hertog?
Roger.
Roger,
no,
yeah.
no. And I think it's sad that he felt the need to write that, especially since it was before the book came out. I don't believe he actually saw a copy of it when he wrote it, but and I think it says something about the state, about the deep insecurities of certain people within academia who know full well that they don't represent Jewish positioning. They don't represent Jewish ideas or Jewish thought. They float upon very small lily pads in their bog and declare themselves to be king of the frogs. And it's sad and it's upsetting, but it also, I remember seeing one of the commenters on that comment, one of the respondents, who said, "You don't understand, this is a primary source. This is not a secondary source that you scholars deal with. This is exactly the kind of source that ends up being the things that scholars study, because this is what a primary source looks like." And I think that it's very possible that many of the great works of Jewish philosophy also, at the time they came out, were not necessarily received as instant classics, but that only with time their importance grew. And I'm not saying
Well,
that
yeah,
this is
Spinoza didn't go over too well when
oh my God.
But some people defended the book. There's a few that criticized. Larry Udelson, he's the editor of Ben Yehuda Press, or one of the presses, isn't there? He wrote, is there any reason for Ben Yehuda Press not to publish a similar competing volume whose contributors range from center to the left? So he seems to agree with him. I defended.
The short answer is no. There is no reason.
Yeah,
there's no reason whatsoever.
And I wrote. Sorry,
go ahead.
I
No,
wrote.
I just think.
I wrote, I don't think gatekeeping cultural production is a particularly good look. And then I wrote, and I didn't realize Shaul Magid was an anti-liberal right-winger. But Breiterman's response here is really interesting. Shaul is an anti-liberal left-wing, and it's the anti-liberalism that attracts Tablet to him.
Listen, I kind of tire of attempting to parse out the deeper meanings of things which might not prove to have deeper meanings.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you.
And I understand, listen, I understand that you guys, look, the focus on, let's talk a second about Jewish studies and the focus on Jewish studies, because, you know, I used to be a part of the Jewish studies field. I did my time as a scholar and attending the conferences.
And you signed the Jewish Studies Zionist Network's mission statement as well.
You did.
A proud signatory of the Jewish Studies Zionist Network's mission statement. Although I had to twist your arm to convince you that I was actually a scholar.
You did?
I
don't.
Yeah, you're just like, no, you're just some editor. You're just some primary source maker.
Maybe that's why I've been exposed to your
you're not a scholar. And then I had to go into my files and make sure that I hadn't imagined that PhD.
I didn't ask you to produce a diploma, if I recall correctly.
No. But a funny thing, my father, who was trained as a nuclear physicist, went through his entire career and never once did anybody ask to see his diploma. And he realized only after an entire career that he could have gone through it just claiming to have one, and gotten away with it.
There are people who do that. There's a scandal every few years.
Yeah, and yet it doesn't deter anybody, it seems.
Anyway, you were
So
saying with Jewish studies.
Yeah,
so I think that it sometimes feel like the field perhaps may have lost its way. I don't want to over dramatize or over exaggerate, but I feel like within the context in which um Judaism has its own tradition of study, and it even embraced 100 some odd 150 years ago Western uh, 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 scientific approach to the study of Judaism, and that was very good and well for some time. And I just feel like to the extent that Jewish studies is subject to the faddishness of and to the vulnerabilities of academia as a whole, outside of the hard sciences and increasingly within the hard sciences, um, I think the Jewish studies becomes potentially the opposite of what it was originally intended to be. To the extent to which that it encourages a driven exploration of what it means to be Jewish, or what it means to study Jewish texts, or what it means to study Jewish experiences, that's great. But if it becomes part of an effort to undermine the very pride and the very confidence and the very commitment of Jews to exploring their own heritage and their own um, reality as Jews, then I think that it undercuts its justification for existing at all. So that's why I signed your mission statement. Um, I'm kind of shocked by how far things have deteriorated since I was involved. It was only 20 years ago or so that I was attending conferences of the Association of Jewish Studies, and always felt that there was room for me and my research and my positions at the time, um, and that there were scholars of similar positioning, and it just feels like it was once a valuable thing, and to the extent that Braderman's rant is representative of what Jewish studies does when it encounters actual new Jewish thought, um, and doesn't come from within their holy gatekeeping, then I think that it's just a sad testimony to the deterioration of the field as a whole. Fields don't exist just because people this week the news, everyone's talking about Nikki Haley, because why is she still running? And the answer that they're given is she's still running because she's still got funding. Right? It has nothing to do with her actual prospects of winning the nomination. So I kind of feel like here's a good metaphor for Jewish studies. Like, if it no longer actually advances understanding of Judaism or understanding of Jewish phenomena, if our understanding of it is no longer advanced by the field, why does it continue to exist? Because it's funded. And at a certain point, and it might be very far down the line, but but it might not be, because we're, in the wake of October 7th, the whole world is seeing the radical gap between donors and philanthropists' intentions in the investment in academic disciplines as a whole, and the outcomes that those academic disciplines are producing. I imagine that many, I mean, we've seen the donor revolts against the university
it's not just
leaders.
donors, it's the Jewish community as a whole, and especially the academic adjacent Jewish community, right? The people who are actually paying attention to what's going on in academia. They're, for the most part, they're outraged at this point. And I'm in touch with these people when they found that we launched the
Well,
network.
what can they do about it? They're outraged, but what leverage do they have over it?
Donors. That's the only leverage that exists. There's nothing else.
So,
it really comes down
this
to
is a
money.
question. This
Or
is
convince
a
the
hard.
Republicans that Jewish studies is a threat, and they'll take it out like they do the other disciplines.
Well, look, this is a hard question that needs to be addressed and aimed at the academic philanthropic community, I mean, those who are actually funding, endowing chairs and funding departments. And, obviously, when you endow a chair, you obviously take the risk that it's going to end up a few iterations down the road being hijacked by people who believe the opposite of what you believe, I guess. But it's always felt like investing in academia has been a fairly low risk investment and high reward. And it turns out that's not the case. And part of the soul searching that has to emerge after October 7th is academic philanthropy. To what extent were the donors asleep at the wheel? And how can that be shifted? How can that be changed? Does it mean working within the existing elite institutions? Does it mean creating alternative elite institutions? Those are questions that are being asked and have been asked now already for a number of years. And obviously the parents and prospective students also need to ask these questions, but I'm not sure that they're the core piece of the business model that drives the academic study of Judaism.
Oh, no,
I
of
think
course
that,
not. I mean, they'll send angry letters to the chancellors and whoever else, but there won't, unless they are people of influence, they're not going to sway anything the university does.
yeah, so the result is you're going to have Israeli institutions plus a small handful of Jewish studies departments in the United States and the rest of the diaspora that are invested in serious study of Jewish things. It coming from a perspective of embracing and revering their subject matter, as all good scholars should do, even as you challenge it. And that's going to be divided from an increasingly irrelevant, detached, arcane form of, one of these guilds that spends its energies tracing angels through the eye of a needle.
Yeah, I mean, people who congregate around, I mean, Breiterman's wall very often, I'm not speaking to his, well, in this case, I will speak specifically to his opinions, but there is such.
But to the extent that his opinions are representative of something larger than himself, because I don't want to just be dumping on him.
But his
right?
wall's always been, well, then again, people like Shel Megiddo have blocked me on Facebook. So, but Breiterman's wall, I mean, there is such animosity, such vitriol against the Tikva on his wall. And I'm still trying to, understand that fully. I don't fully get it. I understand that they have a particular political bent, but how is what they do not legitimately a form of Jewish education?
So I think that a part of what happens in academia is that, and it reveals itself very often in different ways, is that when you have a single school of thought or a single set of ideas that dominate academia, you have people who develop those ideas and try to advocate for them, and then you have what I call antibodies, whose entire job is to just attack anything that threatens it. And what the Tikva Fund does is it brings significant resources, very, very significant resources, into creating a very alternative set of ideas and scholars. And I want to reiterate that, no, I did not receive funding from the Tikva Fund or from its affiliates. But I do think that what they have done, and I have my criticisms, as many people do, of the Tikva Fund, but what they have done is to create an alternative that has the resources behind it to apparently cause a sense of legitimate threat among those people who don't have the idea power necessary to defend what they're doing. Okay, and when you're schools of thought, like any monopoly, they don't. Jewish studies no longer encourages innovation, and it no longer encourages self-criticism, and no longer encourages advancing people who don't fit a very, very specific and not necessarily representative of the Jewish mind, set of ideas. And the thing that gives them their power and authority apparently is the financial resources that are behind all these Jewish studies departments. And what Tikva has done is to try to fund chairs and to from their perspective infiltrate their gates, right? They're gatekeepers. I don't know what their gate is keeping, but they're gatekeepers. He used the word himself, and I found it as baffling as you did, to be quite frank. But
And hostility to the JRB, to the Jewish Review of Books, because they receive or did receive, I don't think they do anymore, funding from Tikva.
Look,
that's a damn good publication. And I'm not just saying that because they published me, but
when I was at the Shalem Center many years ago, we encountered something very similar among Israeli academia. This was around the time that post-Zionism was becoming a big deal. Then we're talking about the late 1990s, early 2000s, and we published a journal called Azure, which had like 10,000 word essays and 35 to 60 footnotes and major scholars, and we published a library of really important books. Like, it turned out that when Hobbes had been translated into Hebrew, it had been like selectively translated with entire chunks of the book. The Leviathan were like not included in the translation, so we published a complete translation, and we did it at a very, very, very high level of quality, much higher than what existed previously, and that drove them absolutely crazy. Because who were we? We came at a level of quality that was very, very threatening to the established, and some Israeli scholars, somebody like Avi Ravitsky, welcomed it and said, it's great to have competition among actual intellectual endeavors at a high level.
Mhm.
But there were also the antibodies who just, attacked and attacked and attacked, and attacking books they hadn't read just because it's a power structure, and power structures have to preserve their power. And unfortunately, many scholars see their role as, instead of actually doing scholarship or welcoming intellectual challenge, to do the exact opposite and to betray their actual job as intellectuals for the sake of the political power structures that keep their jobs.
And they think they're
sad.
right.
Sorry,
They think they're right, and anyone that disagrees is unscholarly because it doesn't fit their model.
Yeah, but that's what happens when you have too many people talking to each other, in a little bubble, and it might be scholarly, but it's not intellectual.
Well, it's true. I mean, this point is true of academia, especially the humanities as a whole. It's not unique to Jewish studies, but because of Zionism being so centered on campus activism, it seems to have made it all the more worse in Jewish studies. And of course, Zionism has always been a controversial thing in Jewish intellectual circles. So I think it's heightened, coupled with the fact that Judaism is also a religion, and people have very strong beliefs on how it should be practiced and what's beyond the pale of acceptable Judaism. I think it's made Jewish studies a real hotbed of this type of behavior, especially when one group manages to assert control over everyone else, and especially when that group is in sync with the orthodoxy that is now present on college campuses, right? They're not going to.
Yeah, but here's the thing: like, academia can claim to be the pinnacle of scholarly and intellectual gatekeeping, if you will, of one field or another field. Certainly, theoretical physics. I'm not going to trust non-physicists to like weigh in on theoretical physics. Okay, maybe I should, but I generally don't. But when it comes to the humanities in general, you have, the study of literature, but you also have actual novelists, right? When it comes to this, you have the study of art, but you have actual artists. right? Musicology, okay, Kanye just came out with a new album. Is that, should musicologists feel like they're being threatened because they're actual artists producing actual new music? Okay, the Jewish intellect is something that has existed completely independently of academic study for thousands of years. And we have our own standards and our own idea of what being an intellectual is. And we have the Sanhedrin where we would have the debate created by letting the least venerable rabbis speak first so that they wouldn't be embarrassed not to speak their minds when the heavyweights came in at the end. And we have a tradition of shakla v'tarya, give and take intellectually, and it's a very powerful thing, and it's been the core, the engine that drives the fertile Jewish mind. And to grab a citadel and say, no, we're the Jewish mind, because they have degrees and titles and tenure and endowments, is a laughing stock. I mean, it's really preposterous. It would be outrageous if it weren't so damn funny. So, and vice versa. So, but I think that the Jewish mind will always override, because we're just too busy thinking about stuff and inheriting our traditions of intellectual endeavor to really care what's going on in Jewish studies. And so my hope is that we can create many, many, many new primary sources to force Jewish scholars to scramble and give them stuff to teach, and not just in Jewish priorities and in other Wicked Son books and in future books produced by the Z3 Institute of Jewish Priorities, and really to create the new Jewish thought that will have its influence and its impact, with or without Jewish scholars, and perhaps they'll catch up at some point and actually study us.
Well, we're, I think, approaching the hour mark, or maybe we've gone beyond it. Adam, do you have any last questions that you would
No,
like?
this was a very good discussion, though.
Absolutely. No, your book looks fascinating, and I look forward to reading some of the chapters. I'm not going to read every single one of them, but certainly the ones that are in my area of interest. How to fix Tikkun Olam. I like that idea.
Right.
Like
That's a
Judaism
Reform
can't be
rabbi.
reduced to universalist activism. Yeah.
Okay, that's a great essay. Rabbi Ami Hirsch is the rabbi of the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue on the Upper West Side, former head of the American Reform Zionist Association, and really has given a tremendous amount of thought to the failures of Tikkun Olam, and to what's needed to fix it. We also and just their endless essays about, again, Yossi Klein Halevi told me that he wanted to write about God. And I said, Yossi, I don't think there's anybody I want to hear about God from more than you, because we hear about God from rabbis, and we might turn our minds off. We hear about God from somebody who's dedicated his life to understanding the real world and politics and culture, and has a very deep spiritual side to him. And he advocates for the creation of a Jewish ashram for the purpose of knowing God. And it's a beautiful essay, really, really an amazing piece.
So if Tikkun Olam needs to be fixed, would that be Tikkun Olam?
Yeah.
That's right, Tikkun squared.
Yeah.
That's when you get back into the math.
Yeah.
So this is the book, Jewish Priorities, 65 Proposals for the Future of Our People. It is available on Amazon and wherever fine books are sold. And I understand there are book clubs spontaneously emerging around America. We've had a lot of inquiries about them, a lot of events coming up, and
the proposed fatwa never took root.
not that I'm aware of, but man, Zalman Rushdie sure got a lot of book
Yeah,
sales
he
out
could do
of
some
out
good.
of
You
his
might have to go into
fatwas, so-
hiding, but maybe Miami's your
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm that worried about the Jewish Studies Association. Their violent tendencies have not fully expressed themselves yet.
All right. Well, thank you for a wonderful episode. This was
Thank
really
you.
perfect, David. We really enjoyed talking to you, and I, for one, look forward to reading your book. This
Thank
is
you so
Jared.
much, Jared and
Absolutely.
Adam. Thank you.
Thanks
This is
for.
us signing off.
All right.